My guest tonight is a guy named Matt Coughlin, who's the co-founder and CEO of a company called XSELL, XSELL Technologies. Won't give it away. He's going to tell you all about what they do. But I met Matt about 18 months ago, and he is an innovator, a forward thinker, and just an amazing human being. Comes out of the great city of Chicago. He's had an amazing upbringing. He's hilarious. I often joke with him and tell him that if he were ever to move out of Chicago, we're going to kick my neighbor out of his house because he's got to be my neighbor. So without further ado, let's dive in to little Matt Coughlin. Matt Coughlin, welcome to 10,000 Miles. How are you tonight?
Vic, I'm great. I've got a cold drink in my hand. It's beautiful out here in Chicago. Temperatures are approaching 70, so I have no complaints.
Drink in hand. What do you have? I happen to have a drink in my hand as well. What do you know? Yeah. Coincidence.
Well, listen, Vic, this is an interesting one. I have something called a Samurai vodka and Spindrift. And really cool, interesting story. Got connected with these guys who are definitely entrepreneurs, but they're investors in Samurai. Samurai is a low-proof vodka. So think about that, right, Vic? I mean, well, the point is to see the entire evening, Vic, right? That's the point.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Fair enough.
So, but on Monday night, but I did say, when you think about just, kind of responding to the market, everybody I think has taken such a, focus on well-being but I just thought how innovative, right? Now people are going the opposite direction where things were increasingly all about higher proof, it's lower proof alcohol.
Well, let's have a little cheers here. I am drinking a 2022 new, not very expensive Cabernet leftover from my party. So cheers. Here we go, Ray, and
cheers.
There you go. A little glass sound effect. Cheers.
Awesome.
Let me tell you a funny story about high proof.
Format. Anytime you can have a drink with a friend, that's fun.
Oh, it's the best. Let me tell you something funny. I occasionally curse on the podcast. It's okay. It's nothing bad. There's no MFs drop, but had a birthday party on April 5th, my birthday. My wife threw a nice party for me. And my wife was saying, alcohol, here's a list, the bartenders, whatever, this is what we need. And I said, I got to get the moonshine limoncello. She's like, no moonshine. Are you out of your mind? The moonshine makes everybody crazy. Don't do it. So the bars opened at 7 o'clock. Two nice bartenders were there and they were all set up. It's 5 of 7. And the bartender says to me, hey, Vic, you want the first drink? My natural reaction is to put everybody first. I'm like, and I was like, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to wait, and I'm saying to myself, and I went, let me have it. All right. So 5 of 7, the first drink comes and I'm drinking tequila all night long. I was appropriately served for a man celebrating his birthday. And my wife, and I didn't find this out until the next day, by the way, my wife comes up to me and she says, Vic, you need to start drinking water. And I don't remember. And I said to her, water's for pussies.
Well,
and so I don't remember.
Hence the need for Samurai, low proof.
All right. I might be a buyer.
It's low proof, it's just low proof. So instead of being 80, it's 55.
Okay, fair enough. 2 for 1. How's that?
That's right.
Hey, Matt, why don't you tell the audience who you are, what you're doing now, and how you got there?
You got it, Vic. I'm Matt Coughlin, Rush chairman. Damn glad to meet you. If any of us were old enough to remember Animal House, that was anytime someone asked me at the bar, right? But I'm Matt Coughlin. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called XSELL Technologies, and Vic, as you know, I've really been focused on how do we apply AI to make people much better at their job, and kind of the original thesis was that I had so many great coaches kind of in my life, whether it be in the context of business, where my sister Mary was very influential in helping me really learn and understand what are the things to be very effective, or could be even, kind of wrestling or football growing up. Coaches have always been, I think, a kind of well understood, highly impactful role. And so for me, using AI as a real-time coach to help people be better, more effective at their job was just it's a no-brainer in my mind.
Nice. That's an interesting perspective because it's funny. I'm a big proponent of executive coaching, have been for 25 years. Had my first executive coach in the late 90s. I was working for a bank, or actually I was working for a mortgage company that was owned by a bank. They came in to review the company, said, everything's great, but you should invest in the leadership team, get an executive coach. And I got my first one. And up until that point, the paradigm was we give coaches to broken people.
Yeah.
And then what I've shifted to, and what everybody around me has shifted to is, hey, coaches aren't for broken people. They're for top performers because we make them even better. And when you look at sports, the greatest of the greatest have a team of coaches around them. So I understand what inspired you because coaching is key. It's how to get people to fulfill their best.
What a great, just hearing you describe that, Vic, I couldn't agree more that historically coaches have been a response, at least in business, to someone
Yeah.
who's not doing well.
Yep.
But, Malcolm Gladwell, who I just love, the guy, he's got some just phenomenal insights, wrote a book called Outliers, which, if you have a chance to
Read it
look at it,
twice.
he tries to distill, yeah, that's right, trying to distill what are the things that cause someone to be an outlier in terms of what they're able to do. 10,000 repetitions is one of his, the number of at bats someone has relative to work. But probably, if not that, the single most influential thing is access to great coaching, right?
That's right.
And it doesn't matter whether it's in golf or, or tennis or business. That access to coaching is just such a highly influential component.
Yeah, we're going to come back to the coaching and your tool and XSELL Technologies. Why don't we go back to the beginning? Why don't you tell the audience who Matt Coughlin is? You mentioned Chicago earlier, but tell us about, how you grew up so we can start seeing how these breadcrumb trails got laid.
Yeah, I mean, so grew up the youngest of 7 children in a house in the southwest side of Chicago. So I think for me, had just an extraordinary childhood. I'm one of those people where I'm a huge advocate for big families, only because mine has been so helpful in always having someone to talk to, always having someone to bounce an idea off, be a partner in crime. Be the person who would help kind of provide you the right direction and have you go down the right path. But I grew up in a house it was very interesting, Vic, because my father had come home from the Korean War and started a milk distributorship. And this goes back to the days where, in Chicago at least, where you have a densely populated area, people would have a milkman.
Yeah.
And the milkman was responsible for bringing all your fresh dairy and kind of bringing you it. And my dad had worked really hard to build this great business where, all the kids had a chance to kind of see firsthand, by doing a little bit of labor, see firsthand, kind of what entrepreneurship looked like, what hard work looked like. But I think the one thing that I saw probably more than anything is just how a business could be disrupted. Because as hard as my dad had worked in building that business, block by block, neighborhood by neighborhood, it got disrupted by pasteurization, something that obviously he had, kind of nothing to do with and was not even in his line of sight. But
Sure.
what that meant was that whole distribution channel that would been, you know, hard work, relationship building, going door to door, kind of building a reputation, all of that had been disrupted. And now the milk was going to be sitting at the gas station. It was going to be sitting somewhere where the person was already going, and I could, I could go, and it would be very convenient. And so for me, the kind of two things growing up that I had a chance to see firsthand was just the beauty of entrepreneurship in terms of being able to go out and author your own experience, write your own chapter. But then I also got to see the flip side of that coin, which was you have to be prepared, or at least be thinking about what is the thing that can disrupt your business. And so
Yeah.
I watched my dad go from, kind of being his own business owner, to then, with 7 kids, having been a veteran and going into a business where, where he was, kind of part of a much larger enterprise and working every day very hard. But it certainly was the same example, the same success beacon, which was work really hard and you'll kind of see the fruits of your labor. So that was kind of the origin of it. And then, Vic, I started my career. It's funny. I went to Illinois State University, home of the Redbirds,
Yep.
where, I studied biology and chemistry. And at that point, I thought, I'm going to be the first doctor in my family. I'm going to be the first guy to go do it. And I'd done this very detailed analysis of what type of medicine that I wanted to study. I wanted to study something where I had weekends off and I
Yeah.
wouldn't be like, called for an emergency, but I could still help people. And so I was going down the path of a podiatrist, right? So I'd be the guy looking at feet all day. And this is
Well,
nothing to have a podiatrist
no, it's
there.
funny. I have a friend
Absolutely.
whose wife, he was a doctor, and then his wife was a doctor, and she said, "I need the weekends off. I'm getting into gastro."
Right?
Because it's like
Quality
rarely
of life.
emergencies, and if they are, they're handled in the ER. Just so you know,
That's
it's
right.
funny. Everybody on this podcast who's set out their course at college or in their early stages of their career, they wind up doing something completely different. The guy who was on before you, he has a master's in astrophysics, and he started a software company and sold it. And we had quite an intellectual conversation about astrophysics. He's a great guy. I'll have to introduce you someday. His name is Dane Ehring. But all right, so
Well,
you're go ahead. Sorry.
if you want to put all of your listeners to sleep, we can talk about restriction fragment length polymorphisms, which is what I studied in biology. It was we were very early in the DNA, kind of DNA and mapping the genome. But
We'll save that for the next
here's what happened.
podcast.
That's right.
Yeah.
I took that summer off to kind of think about the MCAT, get prepared, kind of get myself ready to go ahead and do it. And I started to sell software with a family friend. It was just merging. I mean, you have to go back like that. When I was in college, we were using the punch cards,
Yeah.
and Windows 3.1 had just really come onto the scene and coming out of that. And so selling software was like the Wild West at that point. There were very few people doing it. But I think the thing that resonated so strongly with me was that there was this innovation that we were bringing to people that was quite literally lifting the burden of work that they were having a really hard time doing, or at least, creating a quality of work-life balance. And so when we could start building software that would lighten that load,
Yeah.
I just fell in love with it, right? And that became part of my journey for, I want to say, close to 15 years, Vic. Um, and then after that, interestingly enough, I had a colleague who had reached out to me and said, "Hey, I'd really like to have you come in. I've read this book, The World is Flat. I'm convinced." This is between 2005 and 2012. So,
Okay.
this is really kind of that outsourcing is really starting to become very, very prolific and prominent. People are building capability around how to bundle work and take it to different geographies. But there was a unique twist on the opportunity that I got involved with, which was that we weren't going to take it to offshore. We were going to take it and bundle the work in a way where at-home moms and dads who were looking to strike some sort of balance could do the work. And so
And this is
we had
05.
built it in '05.
Wow,
So
you're 20 years ahead
the
of the curve.
and Vic, it was on Good Morning America. Several of the largest responses to Good Morning America with Tori Johnson were about at-home work, and it was our team. And from 2005 to 2012, we built a 28,000 person workforce
What was the name of
that
this
was
company?
bringing to life. It was called Arise. It's
Ah,
still there. I subsequently left to start this new business, which I'll tell you about more. But
yeah.
I had left, and after 6 years, I'd launched it in the UK. We had gotten the business between the US, UK, and Canada, 28,000 representatives. So if you would call Apple or Disney or Walgreens or AT&T or Verizon or GE or AIG or Home Depot, there's a good likelihood you might have talked to one of my people. But the second component about that business, Dick, was that everybody was a independent business owner. They had incorporated. So I felt like we were like the Uber of
Yeah,
at home, just
that's
really
incredible.
early, right?
Well, what's
Very, it was
interesting,
very
just
cool business.
yeah, just to put an exclamation point on your outsourcing piece. So I was at Lehman Brothers in 2005, and outsourcing was kicking into another gear then, like big time. And for you guys to be doing what you're doing was pretty, really forward thinking, because at that time, Lehman Brothers had announced, hey, we're no longer consuming offshore resources from third parties. We're building our own site, Lehman India.
That's right.
And they built the building out there sort of lickety split. I mean, it didn't take long. There was a building that was already under construction. They finished the construction. I think in a year, we had capacity for 6,000 people, which was a bit unprecedented. And I'm telling you, it took less than a year for that building to be filled up. So that was started in 04, 05. We started filling the seats. And by the end of 05, there were 4,000 to 6,000 people that were part of Lehman India. So yeah, exclamation point on that. And for you guys to be doing this while big Wall Street firms were filling their own seats, that's pretty amazing. I didn't know that about you.
Yeah, it was a great chapter in my career, and now I think back, originally when I was there, I probably didn't have the same perspective, but in the fullness of time and after a couple of cocktails, I think the thing that really stood out to me now is that as much as we were validating BPO as a way of doing work, we were validating, first of all, the gig economy. I mean,
Yeah.
think about this. This was so early. So much of what we fought was the co-employment noise. If you remember back then,
Oh
FedEx
yeah.
had
Big lawsuits.
that noise. But we knew that we could tap into this really qualified, great workforce. Like think about, Vic, how many dads or moms that for some reason taking care of kids, taking care of an elderly parent, taking care of someone who needs special assistance. All of these people had so much to contribute, but the convention was stopping them.
Yeah.
The convention was holding them out of the game. And I just look back at it and I was like, man, we tapped into something. We were early. And but I always say this. I say you're early right up until you're late, right?
I use
And
it all
I'd
the
rather
time.
be early than late.
I use it
Yeah.
all the time. I give you credit for it every time I use it. I know other people that use it. They give you credit as well. I was at a conference this past week where, or the week prior rather, where you were quoted on that, and I love it. It's amazing because work at home, right, was a bit frowned upon.
Yeah.
Pre-COVID.
100%.
I mean, and certainly in 04, 05 and up through COVID. Really found. I remember the first time I was working home, I had an 8x8 phone. It was costing me like $40 a month. I was innovative. I had I had an IP phone on the desktop. And this might have been 07, 08. And I would have to lower the cone.
That's right.
Let anybody know I'm home. It was incredible. Like, don't make any noise. Don't let the dog bark. We didn't have noise canceling or anything like that. Yeah, I had to sort of pull on appearances. COVID came and it was like, I'm at home. Oh yeah, that was my kid running by in a diaper, or yeah, what was that? Oh yeah, it's my landscaper, or that's I just had a water pipe break. I'll be right back, or something. I mean, it really normalized.
Many great videos, aren't there?
Oh,
so many great videos.
Well, the early ones on where, people were taking their iPhone and walking into the restroom and they didn't realize they're on the video and they get squatty on the potty. And next thing you know, 30 people are going, oh, that's nice. She's on the potty. I'm glad we can see that. People acclimated pretty quickly.
It is a, I'm going to geek out a little bit here based on my biology, kind of background, but
all right, bring it.
So many times a step in the evolutionary capability is, you think about natural selection, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's always a challenge that creates that step. right?
Yeah.
And otherwise, there's this incrementality that occurs. It's incrementally. But what did the pandemic do? It just created this scenario where a little bit of natural selection would occur. Either you can, be adaptable. You can
Yeah.
do business in this new environment, or you can't, right? And
Yeah.
it's funny because we'll talk about this later, but my son Charlie's, very proud right now. He's graduating from the University of Michigan next weekend.
Awesome.
Cognitive science and he's just he's done a wonderful job, but he's in this category of people, the class of 2024. They are the most pandemic impacted class. Their senior graduation, senior prom, senior
Yep.
everything disrupted. Um, and and then he's gone through the first year at the University of Michigan was, really not a first year in college. It certainly didn't mirror or mimic what we went through, right?
Yep.
And I will tell you, Vic, it's like crazy because you have this sense of empathy. But then I sat and I thought to myself, I'm like, man, this kid is more adaptable than any of the others, right? He's just got this, and I've got one younger and one older. And it's
Mm-hmm.
not to infer that they didn't go through the same thing, but he had all these inflection points that were built in at really key moments where the pandemic, it was more disruptive, right? It was disproportionate to that group. And I think what they did is they just built that armadillo, kind of, way of protecting themselves and then going forward. That is so it's actually interesting to watch. But it's
You know,
to
I
your
often
point
think
as you're
about
describing it.
yeah, I often think about the pandemic and what it accelerated. To your point, you said either you could, no, either you did or you didn't. Like, I think that's what you said. It was a matter of survival for most
Yeah.
companies. Like, if you couldn't do it, you'd be out of business. So there was a had to do. You had to rise to
I
the
had to do,
occasion.
Vic, but like let's I had to do it, but I'll challenge you on one thing. Just
All
get your
right.
thoughts on this, right? Think about your days at Lehman, where you'd walk in and people might hang the jacket on the back of the door and then
Yeah.
walk over and maybe they've got a sink in their
Yeah.
and then you go over and I'm just going back. I'm envisioning Mad Men, right?
Yeah.
Envisioning this days of your. But here's what I would say though. I think there was a bunch of people that might otherwise have held on for a long time and just said, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. I'm going to exit and create some room. So businesses had to do it. But
Yeah.
I think some other people said, you know what? I've decided I'm at a point in my career. Maybe I'm at the very end of my twilight where I could have stretched it for another 5 or 8 years,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? If I wanted to. Some of those people just said, I hope you
Yeah,
guys
that's
enjoy
true.
yourself.
They
Nothing
they
bad,
they
right?
didn't like the new
Nothing
way of
bad.
working. Yeah, they didn't like it.
Yeah.
But it really as crappy as it was, and it was bad. Um, that moment created so many other things. I mean, I had customers that were about to spend hundreds of millions of dollars building buildings. Certainly, I have one customer that was going to spend $100 million building a building, and they were small at the time. They were only 150 people. They were a startup. They just get going. They're almost 2,000 people today. And the president and chief operating officer said once he sent everybody home and everybody had virtualized infrastructure and the model was proven, he goes, building was canceled. We're not building it.
Yeah.
We are now a virtual company. And because me and a couple of leaders are, just used to seeing each other every day, I got a professional suite for 50 people. That's it.
Yeah.
That's the extent of my infrastructure. And then what happened was, initially, all of the sort of nature of localized competition for resources evaporated. So if you were in a
Yeah.
market and you had call center people and it was a hot spot for call center people or professionals in a certain vertical and you had to compete with other people for resources, that was gone. You were hiring people in Kalamazoo, Michigan. You were hiring people in Seattle, Washington. You were hiring people all over the place. And the only requirement was, do I have the skill set to do the job? Early on,
That's right.
people were accepting positions for less for the benefit of being remote. We know that's past us right now because it's a very normal thing. But it created a lot of other flexibility and opportunities. And back to where you started here, I want to hear more about it. This whole notion of tapping into the untapped, because there's a big play in the last 2 years about really a resurgence in that mindset. And there are
Yeah.
companies resisting it a little bit, but it's broadening and it's opening up. So tell us more about this, this untapped nature of people and resources and talent that you hit in the late, 07, 08.
Yeah, yeah. So, and just to put a capstone on that last piece, I mean, Vic. Interestingly enough, when I did that, there was a group of technologists that we were involved with, at least part of the team, that built a scheduling tool. Now, scheduling is as old as time, right? And it's never been easy. But because of this natural kind of evolution that was occurring with the workforce, they built a scheduling tool that won the Malcolm Baldrige Award, and it's literally in the Smithsonian Institute. Okay.
Wow.
And it was because it basically turned something where, it used to be something as pedantic as handwritten or typed in, and you get your schedule, and basically said the top performing people could go on and choose the half hour increments that were most convenient in their life, just materially changing the elasticity of how long you'd have that employee, right? Because now it's the work that fits their life. But these are the types of things that natural selection would really kind of change the game on. And it's really that business where a lot of the kernels were planted around the business that I have now, which, and I'll tell you, it's funny, regardless of the brand, regardless of the business. And I had mentioned earlier, Vic, I had a chance to be able to launch that business with Apple and Disney and Walgreens and AT&T and Verizon and GE and AIG and Home Depot. And I kept seeing the same observation, regardless of the industry, regardless of the company, which was that your best people, and I'm sure this probably, for you at Lehman and
Yeah.
the places that you've been, your best people are not marginally better. They are in almost every instance a multiple, if not many multiples, better than everyone else, right? And so
100%.
outliers have been outliers. That's why they're called outliers. Like
Yeah.
literally, that's why they're called that, right? And so, I with 28,000 people, I just stir in bed thinking about, well, what if everyone could have talked to Karen, right, or William, right?
Yeah.
And what would the business look like? How different would things be? And that it was that question. That was the question. Like, what if every customer had dealt with my single best person? That kind of set me out on the journey that I am on now, which is AI infused, and it's been one that's been, to be honest with you, super exciting. So,
You mind if I peel back the onion on something real quick? Because you're
yeah,
saying something and I don't want to let it pass me. I am interested in what you think makes people outliers. And let's use the contact center as an example, because you had 28,000 agents in it. And we can really apply this to anything. We can apply it to sports. We can apply it to, math. We can apply it to, academic things or physical capabilities. Maybe physically less. There's a lot of genetics there. What is it that makes people outliers? How do people become outliers?
well, that's a super loaded question, Vic, in
Yeah,
terms of, because I think there's
exactly.
many paths to becoming an outlier. And there's a great book by Thaler, who's the Nobel laureate at the University of Chicago, where they've done the behavioral and economic assessment of what gets people to do certain things. But
Mm-hmm.
I think there's some people that the synapses fire a little bit differently, their intuition, and it's much of what we talked about here, Vic. Like my upbringing is all the hardwired stuff I brought to the table. It's the things that
Yeah.
I learned from my father when he would talk about how do we grow his original business, or where do you go from here? Those are the things that are hardwired that you then bring to the table when you go to a job. And interestingly enough, it's been my experience that it is almost never codified in the curriculum or the training that enterprises deliver to their team, right?
Yep.
And so it's the things that they do that are different that causes it. And I've used this analogy a bunch of times, but you know, there's a group of people that go through and they have a conversation. Let's say you are comparing the camera on one device and the camera on another device,
Yep.
and you're trying to make a buying decision, right, Vic? You're going in and you're trying to make a buying decision, trying to figure out what you like and what you don't like. And you could just stand pat with your current one, or you can make this, kind of several $100 investment upgrade to the new. And so you say, hey, well, what's the difference in the camera on this one? And if I haven't built the appropriate rapport and I don't know anything about you up until that point, I probably go, well, Vic, this one's 20 megapixels and that one's 80 megapixels.
Okay.
And if you're like most people, you go, thanks, right? And you probably then don't make a decision. But let's say I've spent the time, energy, effort to build a little bit of rapport with you, and I know that that you live on a ranch or you like to go to the ranch down in Texas and you like
Yep.
to take pictures of the landscape. And I say, hey, Vic, this device is 20 megapixels and this one's 80, which is the difference between being able to take pictures of, some wildlife up close that's out on the ranch from a couple hundred yards versus this silhouette, right? Only being able to get silhouette. And that's the type of thing that causes the outcome to occur versus, something that's correlated with the outcome, right? These are the things that cause some of the people to be outliers in terms of their performance, is that they understand and intuitively are able to connect the things for the customer that otherwise the others, well-intended, all
Yeah.
well-intended, they
Yep.
just, they would have given you a factually accurate answer.
So you think people get that? I'm going to break it down simple. That explain it sort of discipline and process from things in their past and how they were brought up and things that were happening to them. Like again, I go back to outliers. We had this whole thing. 20% were your top performers. 70% were your middle range and 10% were the bottom performers. And no matter where you were, there was a bell curve there. And that was the corporate America bell curve for the longest time. And I'd be surprised if it's not still the same. But I was always intrigued as to what, and I told this story on a prior podcast, but I'm going to say it again because I'm interested in your take on it. I once got called to my boss's office when I was a CIO of a company, and I had come via an acquisition. A lot of people that worked for me at my past company came along with me. 14 people relocated to a new state, and 6 months in, I get called to my boss's office, a longtime employee of the firm. And I walk in and the head of HR is in there. I'm going to say this quick because people who might be listening heard the story already. I was accused of having a list of favorites that used to work with me. Then in general, I was used to having a list of favorites of people in general. And my response was, oh yeah, I definitely favor people. And they looked at me horrified. And I said, but yeah, and there is a club, but it's called Top Performers Club, right? And I focus on people who are kicking ass and they're really working hard. And here's the good news. Membership to this club is not exclusive. It's based upon your own output. And I go back to my childhood and I think about the work I did with my grandfather when I was single digit age and the pride I would get from anything. My grandfather was the superintendent of the apartment building I lived in, and polishing the brass, seeing it shinier than it's ever been. That moved me. I wanted the accolades. I wanted the, hey, Vittorio, that was amazing, or my dad coming home and go, wow, what happened here? This is really great. I'm still want to dial in, and we can move off this in a little bit, but I want to dial in again on the outliers because I don't think we've really hit to the nucleus of it. Like, what is it? Here, I'll give you, for instance, and a lot of people I know, this is not just me, they're uncomfortable not feeling like they're on top of their game. It makes them uncomfortable. Where I see some people, they're happy to cruise. What is it?
Yeah.
What's underneath that, in your opinion?
Well, here's the happy to cruise thing. I'm there, Vic, but I think for me, I had this. To be honest with you, I'm blessed. I've had this environment where I've had a very successful parents. And then my older sister, so I'm the youngest of 7. She's been wildly successful. They've invested time, energy, effort in me, right? And I would certainly look to that and say a lot of that comes out in kind of the way that I approach business. But separate two things. I do think there's some people who are not well intended, but I think the vast majority of people that you engage with, certainly the vast majority of people that I've seen show up to work. It's like when you were a little kid, right? You got it's first day of school, you got the new gym shoes, you got the shirt. That was
Yeah.
the one day with 7 kids. After one thing, you got new clothes. You're like, this, I look
Yeah.
great, right?
Otherwise, you had
And,
hand-me-downs.
yeah, right. And I said,
Yeah.
you're running around and you're like, these shoes make me faster, right? But the point is, that's how people approach their jobs. They're eager, they're excited. This is a new chapter. And what I found is in most instances, we've created a gap where there's a bunch of things that we've added to the work, but we haven't really thought about what does it look like to do this job from a standing start. So let's start with an
All the
assumption.
time.
Let's assume positive intent
Okay.
that people want to do well. Um, I have this belief that basically, if we could find a way to give people the answers to the test in terms of what does cause the outlier contribution,
Yep.
that there's no conspiracy theory, there's nothing there that the people would want it, and they would want to grab it and go, thank you, right? Um, Interestingly enough, Vic, it's exactly what I found is that if you do this correctly and you do it in scale, people really do want to know what the answers to the test are. They just don't know how to do it themselves.
Yeah.
So, and to your point, will you have some natural selection that occurs in the workforce where you have to weed out some of the people where maybe their intent wasn't as high or their desire to do well wasn't as high? Yes. But I think the vast majority of people want to do well at their work, right? And think of them, it's always been helpful for me to think of them as that first day of school. They're showing up, they're eager, they're
Yeah.
excited. And so many of these companies, think about that. So many of these companies that set it up where within 30 or 60 or 90 days, the person's so disenfranchised, they're so
Yeah.
demoralized, they're so ill-equipped, they just go,
Tools suck, training shitty. I'm playing with live bullets with customers who are frustrated, right? I wasn't given all the information I needed and all the tools I need to really satisfy a scenario. Hey, we'll come back to this at another time. I don't want to beat the outliers thing, but I think what you've described to me about the well-intended people are the 70%.
That's
I
right.
still think
That's
I
right.
don't think we've tapped, and I agree with you, by the way. I don't listen, you know me, I'm a uber positive guy. I don't think the majority of people coming in going, hey, I'm gonna duck under and I'm gonna get over there. People want to come to work and they want to feel productive. And I've been
That's
around
right.
a lot of places, to your point, where it's really a challenge for them to be as productive as they might otherwise. Whether or not they reach outlier or not, we can leave that alone for now. But certainly the gap in bringing forward the behaviors, the data of the best interactions. I won't even say the best people. What do the best interactions look like? Whether a great interaction came from somebody who's usually not great or it came
That's
from
right.
somebody who's always great, it doesn't matter. And so I see where you're headed is you're like, hey, how do I capture the best interactions brought on by all people in the organization? How do I repeat that? So tell us more
That's right.
about, how you're doing that and where you're getting.
Yeah, I mean, so as I mentioned, I was laying in bed and I'm thinking about, this North Star that's very easy. It's very simple. What if every customer had dealt with my single best person? At that time, my older sister Mary was on the board of directors of my last company, and she was also a trustee at the University of Chicago. And we started having this conversation about now this is 2012-ish, right, Vic? This is early days. We started having this
Yeah.
conversation about can you use algorithms? Can we be scraping dialogue to discern what the top performers are doing? And start to really kind of put some wood behind that arrow. But the big thing is I meet it's so often the case, right? I meet this brilliant young guy, Mark Storr is a, absolute treasure, but Mark was coming through the PhD program. He was an outlier himself, right? So on the curve of like brilliant guys, he's way up there.
Okay.
And, Mark says, Matt, can I said, Mark, I want to, um, I want to try and understand, what it is that top performers do and why they outperform. And he said, can I change your wording there? You want to know what they do to cause the outcome. And I said, oh,
okay.
Yeah, I guess, Mark. I mean, it sounds like semantics to me, but what's that mean? He said, well, the reason why I say that is you go back in the time machine, kind of 2012 is when the machine learning craze starts, but right before that, there was this branch of mathematics, causality. Dr. Pearl had won the Turing Award, but there was this branch of mathematics really focused on what causes the thing to occur, right? And so from day one, we had really been indexing towards that. But that was the moment right there, Vic, where I said, okay, this guy can help me. And we became partners to collaborate on a machine learning platform for dialogue. This is, think of circa now 2015.
Okay.
We basically filed the patent right there, that one that you see there.
All right.
Building a machine learning platform for dialogue that would learn what the top performers do, and then in real time make that available in the context of a coach to the other agents. So, imagine now, Vic, as previously you'd be sitting on the call, you would not have the information of the top performer. You would later go into a coaching session where someone would probably, in a very not very tactful way, deliver, kind of coaching. You'd come out and you'd be crying, right? Now, instead, right in the moment, it says, Vic, do it this way, right?
Yeah.
Say this right now. And
yeah, plus in the prior scenario, that was only happening in 2 to 5% of the interactions that were happening. So you could have been a rock star on 98% of your calls, and you got the one bad call, and that's the one that got plucked, and then you went and got a talking to.
Yes. And you know what, Vic, I mean, to be honest with you, the inverse of that was happening, which was like, you're struggling your way through these things, and the converse of that is you're struggling your way through these things, and you get the two, but they're not productive because they don't represent every call that I've had. They just represent the two that you randomly chose, right?
Sure.
And so I've just been so intimately familiar with the conundrum because of 28,000 agents that, to me, my mom used to say, necessity is the mother of invention, right? Necessity is the mother of invention. When you know something and you see it and you're dealing with it every day, that's when you want to build the thing that would change it. And so, really built the company out of that understanding. And then, now you look at it in the fullness of time, what we can tell you is that we've helped some of the largest companies on the planet harvest the collective intelligence of their business. So think of this, Vic, go back to your layman days. Did you ever have transparency and understanding of all the little bits of tacit knowledge and understanding and strategy that people were deploying? And so all of that, someone would work for you and then leave, and it went right with them, right? But what we started to do for organizations is allow them to start building the collective intelligence of their enterprise, learning what the top performers are doing. And I just, at that moment, it started to I could still go back and remember it. I was like, we're on to something. This is going to be pretty extraordinary.
Hey, I keep staring at those patents behind you. Can you tell us specifically what you have patented? Like tell me, if I read the patent, what would it say?
It would say, quite literally, that we patented a real-time coach or cobot. So real-time AI coach or cobot.
Yep.
It's a neural symbolic system that learns what the very best people are doing relative to the outcome that you're trying to achieve in every situation, and then makes that available to the other representatives.
So that concept is what you patented.
That's right.
You must have a lot of litigation going on right now.
We've let some organizations know that they're infringing for sure. And,
Okay.
here's the thing though, Vic, like, the other one that you can't see is a quote that I am absolutely in love with, which is Teddy Roosevelt being in the arena, right?
Oh, it's my favorite. Judge not the man in the arena, the
Yeah,
doer of deeds.
that's right. The
Yeah,
credit belongs to the man who's in the arena, not
that's right.
right. So not the critic. And
Not
and
the
I feel
critic. It's
like
not the critic who counts.
there you go.
One of my
And for me,
faves.
I feel like we're going to spend ourselves in a worthy cause building this because people are starting to see it and it's resonating. And I don't want the distraction of litigation, but certainly you can see, there's so many people that were, and I hate to say this because it sounds derogatory, but they were like a skunk chasing dog early days with bots and chasing after certain applications that now they're like, oh, wait, I see the opportunity here. And they've kind of come back to the other side. And we've been incredibly consistent that helping people become very good at the work that they're doing is the lowest risk, highest reward opportunity that exists. And over time, you will be able to have absolute empirical evidence around what automation could and should occur. I love it. Right now, there's people just playing whack-a-mole, right? Random acts of automation. Hell, I can automate that. And it was funny, Vic. I had a chance to work with a Fortune 10 company that um, they were like, hey, we've deployed the bots and they're all working. They're working wonderfully. And at some point, the signal was very late, right? But the signal came back that, wait a minute, the bots are not working. They're just getting the customer. And so we were making the customers angry at the fastest pace we've ever made them angry, right? So the bots are
Okay.
now, they've increased our velocity at making customers angry. Really, I look at it and I said, instead of being a hammer looking for a nail, I've got an algorithm, I've got a specific, start with the business problem, which is today there exists entirely too much waste. And go back to what we started our conversation with, Vic, is in my mind, and we'll talk about the inflection point we're at right now separately, but in my mind, when I started this business, I had just come out of the experience where most of the world's innovation was around labor arbitrage and bundling and chasing the cheapest place back, believe it or not.
That's
Right?
right.
I mean, just to be
There's still a lot of
totally
hearts and
honest,
minds in that
this
camp, but they're slowly evolving.
but listen, companies that spend so much time, energy, effort really around innovations to train people faster, to select them better, to do these things because we really just want to keep getting to a lower cost of labor, right? And what that does is it doesn't allow you to really address the root cause, which is, you know, can you actually build great experiences for your customer that maybe remove or reduce the likelihood that they have to call in for these reasons, that they have to do these other ones that are low value, right? Can you create, and I will have said this, and think about this, right? Like if you were, let's say in the 1800s, you're building a general store,
Yep.
and someone says, Vic, I can build something where you don't have to ever talk to your customers. I mean, how fast would you deny or decline that service, right?
1 millisecond.
And now it's like the tail's wagging the dog. I mean, I'm sitting here going, wait a minute. In every single instance, if you told me that every time I can have a conversation with my customer, I could learn more about them, understand what they want and need, understand
Yeah.
what's most influential to them, understand what about my services do resonate, do not resonate. What about what we're doing at scale? And I think up until this point, because we didn't have the technology, people said, I'm not learning anything, so let's just try and get rid of it. What's so exciting about the frontier where we're at right now is for the first time ever, we have the computing power, we have the algorithms, we have the capability to at scale create this N of one experience, right? Like, it's I see the guitars, right, Vic, and I'm sure there's some Fenders back there, but like
Yep.
there's an N of one experience where they know Hendrix versus and this is like in my mind, I go, what's very exciting about where we're headed is the intersection of the human and artificial intelligence experience. Because I think once we clear the noise of the people who are simply just trying to say, let's get rid of all the people in each one of the roles, certainly there's things we can automate. I'm all for that. And
Yeah.
I would never say that we shouldn't try and automate those. But we're going to create this really brilliant and bright future where just think of something very simple. On-demand access to an expert on any product, anytime, everywhere, anywhere. Right? Like, that's going to exist. 100% that's going to exist. And it's the reason why, Vic, now, we work with these large enterprises around building, the application to support their agents, whether it's in sales or service. But now we've transitioned and we started to use a lot of that know-how and infrastructure to build what we call an expert language model, or an XLM. But think of an XLM is, like, obviously, you think of ChatGPT, 33,000 words, internet corpus, right? The expert language model is the, let's just say 8,000 to 9,000 words that are, kind of germane and relevant to your business, the concepts that are important to your business.
Yeah, they were your words.
The understanding of how they relate.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And they don't have the risk. They don't have the risk of some of the other words that you certainly would not want to experience, right? But interestingly enough, that once you start to think about an expert language model, now you can index it towards that outlier in performance. So I'm going to say it here for the first time on your podcast, and right here, I think one of the more valuable artifacts that's going to exist for each company, and whether it's with us or it's with some other way that they're going to approach it, is going to be their expert language model, which is the outlier understanding of how to respond to every one of these things. And, Gartner, came out with this assessment, which I thought was so interesting. And quite honestly, I wanted to find them and give them a sip of the souring. But they came in, they said over 50% of the large language models that organizations are building for their enterprise, their enterprise language models, will be abandoned in the next 3 years.
100%.
So let that sink in for a minute, right, Vic?
Well, hold it right there.
Talking to some of the biggest banks.
Yeah, let me fortify that a little bit for you. So I have a Fortune 50 customer who I've been talking to for quite a long time. And everything they do is at scale, $3 billion a year in technology spend every year. It's a big, big place. And we were sort of caught up again at the top of the year. We have a standing every 6 weeks. We talk. We do a lot of stuff aside from service the account. And I said, hey, what was the biggest surprise for you in 2022, 2023, but mostly 2023? And he goes, it's a no-brainer. I said, what was that? He goes, the amount of insights from conversations. He said, we could look at data all we want. We could look at clicks. We can look real-time use on the website. But that's limited. That's down a narrow funnel. We're guiding people to a specific place in a digital experience. They don't go where you don't want them to go. They only go down the path you lay for them. But when you're talking to people, the universe is wide open. And he said, in the amount of insights that we've been able to glean from transcriptions, and the amount of activity we've been able to garner from these transcriptions about how people are thinking and what they're feeling and what they want and what they don't want, and the adjustments we've been able to make to our enterprise has surprised everybody. And the amount of data we've collected from those conversations and the insights is bigger than anything we've ever done.
Yeah.
That's effectively what you're doing.
Yeah. I mean, and so the second part of that, Vic, which I love where you're going, the second part of that is, all of us now are so familiar with SaaS, right? And kind of just this idea that you have, instant access to the tools and capabilities to be able to do the work that you need to, right? And it's funny because, we have a lot of like catchy ways to characterize, we had a great, we're in Chicago, so we had this great way of working all night one time with bands on our rooftop, and it was called Lollapalooza, but it was really based on the math that we were doing that we had this. But one of the things that I think about, right, Vic, is this idea that I think we're going to look back, and the first thing that we're going to say is, okay, how did we democratize the ability for everybody to do this work? Okay, it should not have to be a data scientist or a master's in computer science or somebody who's got 7 or 8 or 50 of those people working for them, right? I think one of the really interesting and important things for us right now is to think, how do you make this type of capability accessible to anyone who's domain relevant? So to your point, think about this. You have all these people who have a wealth of knowledge and experience in the business that they're engaged in, right?
Yeah. Yep.
They might not be credentialed data scientists, but they certainly have the ability to say this, not that. And oftentimes, the data scientists, as brilliant as they may be, they don't have the experience with the domain. And so they will chase the rabbit all the way down the hole, right? I mean, to the bottom. And so
Overlooking simplicity.
one of the things that I get, this is right. And
Overlooking simplicity.
The thing about that is overlooking simplicity is a great way. I love that. I like that. I will
Happens all the
now
time.
Now we're reciprocating. This is like bartering.
You know,
right? I'm gonna
you
use
know
that.
how many times I've been schooled. You know, we've rolled out to. I'm gonna go back to a quick story. I'm at a company, and we roll out the first mobile app in the pawn industry. 1,100 locations, and people can look up the merchandise that's at a place that doesn't exist in that industry, and they can find something that's a generator that's down the road, or 10 miles away or whatever, and they can geolocate things they're looking for. Great. We also roll out a technology that allows professionals in the store, sales associates, to split commission. Because if you go into a store as a customer and you see Vic, you go, hey, I'm going to buy that, but I want to go home and check with my wife, make sure I can buy that. And then you come back the next day and I'm not there, but Mary's there. And you walk in and go, hey, where's Vic? Oh, Vic's off today. Oh, well, I was talking to Vic. Vic and Mary can split that commission. All's fair. I go out to and we think the two are completely disconnected. We don't even put this thing together. I go out and I'm in Vegas, and I have a guy who comes up to me and goes, hey man, I want to thank you for that mobile app. I am making so much more money because of that mobile. He's an associate in the store. I am making so much more money because of that mobile app. I go, how the hell are you? This is a customer facing app. What do you mean you're making so much more money? No, you don't understand. A customer walks in, wants a generator, and I don't have it. I get on the mobile app. Because these systems were premise-based because they needed to be on in real time, and they uploaded at night. There was no SaaS solution. So I can get on the mobile app and see that we got one a mile down the road, and I'm sharing with the guy in the next store. And I went, I'm an idiot. Look at this is the creativity of people working with tools they have that was completely overlooked by 250 people in technology in the business. Completely overlooked.
Yeah, it's always the case, right?
Always.
But in that instance that you described, like to me, I go, listen, how do you unleash all of these domain relevant experts on your business so that you can actually start to capture it? And so going back to this one with Gartner, I mean, part of what's going to happen, Vic, is that you can imagine like anything else. You have a bunch of artisanal one-off work being done by system integrators and companies where you're going to go, oh, in a year is too much effort. We don't have the resources to continuously maintain this thing. It's one-off, and so it starts to lose its effectiveness, right? I think what you're going to find is that businesses that continuously listen and harvest and understand what great looks like to their customer, and then can make that ubiquitous, make it available to everybody in your company so that it's the top thing on their mind when someone asks it. It's not an answer, it's the answer, right?
Yeah.
That's going to be this currency. This currency that's going to exist in the future is trust, it's accuracy, it's immediacy. These are the things that are going to be so durable when you start to build customer relationships. Like, make no mistake, yes, there's tech and there's answers and there's things, but it's just like every other chapter in time. Trust, accuracy, immediacy, right? These are like, this is what these have always been the currency.
Hey, let me ask you a question. I buy into these concepts and I'm a big believer. And you're right. For the people that are coming to work that really want to do a good job and are lacking the training, the tools, the exposure, the coaching, and this is only in every organization, especially as you scale up, it becomes harder and harder to deploy. This could be a game changer. So at what transaction level can somebody afford to deploy this type of technology?
Listen, I sat on stage with a client last week running a wildly successful kind of agency. It's got 30 representatives that this is supporting, and he's seeing the impact of it. He talked about reducing the attrition, making all of the B and C performers, like just think of any A, B, and C performers, getting those C's up to B's and those B's up to A's. It's just such a huge impact on your business, right? So I would say, Vic, you'd probably run into whether it could be done with a human being versus the technology at numbers smaller than that, right? I would just challenge you even to think about, might you be able to do it in a way that that could be more hands-on. But to me, at 30, you are really in that 30 and up, you're really in that sweet spot of being able to build the enterprise collective intelligence and be able to make that available. So now when someone comes in, think about this, right? When someone joins the business, they join with the benefit of the real-time coach sitting on their shoulder who's listened to every previous conversation. Right?
They walk in, they're a scratch golfer to begin with.
That's right. Hey, Vic,
they're shooting scratch golf right on their first round.
That's right. And like, listen, the train has left the station. I still think there's some people that are. I use this analogy, right? They're not even an analogy. The saying, they're in a river in Egypt, right? In Nile. They're literally sitting here going, oh, you know what? Maybe I'm at the twilight of my career. I'm just trying to hang on to see whether I have to really embrace this. I think more than anything, what I've seen is the sheer pace of innovation is fundamentally different. And
it's so different.
Think this is the most important, if you don't mind, Vic, there is one topic I want to pick your brain on. But
yeah, well, before we do that, because I have something written down here, if you don't mind, because I think it ties into the last thing. I was sitting out back today. I had a little break, an hour in the afternoon, and I went out back in my yard, and I like just staring out into nothing. I was thinking about our time tonight. And I was thinking about AI in general. And I know you spent a lot of time thinking about this, so I wanted to ask you about it. We are in a world of hyperconsumption. We are consuming more information, more things, more stuff than ever before. We're consuming more broadcasting and television. We're consuming more information. We're consuming more goods. Did you ever think a box would show up at your front door every single day from Amazon?
Yeah.
I mean, we're on first name basis with delivery people here. And listen, sometimes it's a $4 item. Oh, it's midnight. I forgot I needed toothpaste and I'm out of it. Can I get that by 5:30 in the morning? I sure can. Click. Oh, I need a left-handed server adapter widget that I can't get anywhere else. Oh, they got it on Amazon. Comes in. I think AI addresses this hyperconsumption in a way that without it, the universe would almost crumble under the amount of people and the things we're consuming. Wouldn't happen. The things people need. Now, you could make an argument, well, people don't need as much stuff and things. We could slow down the pace of consumption. You don't have 5,000 channels. You have 3. You have 7. You have 10. Right, we slow this down, but the world is evolving and moving. What do you think about the correlation between AI and its capacity in a world of hyperconsumption?
Well, it's probably, this is probably one for an entire podcast with you and I.
Okay.
I think,
well, then we'll tap it and we'll come back at a later date, but go ahead.
Yeah, but let's just be clear. AI itself is a hyper consumer.
Yeah.
A consumer of electricity, I mean, like, listen, it is the dirty secret no one wants to talk about right now, Vic, but um, you can literally see from a heat map from outer space where the centers that are running hot with AI are. And,
Yep.
I think as people who have some view of the future, you look at it and you go, well, wait a minute, why do we gotta, why do we have to go out and raise between $5 and $7 trillion worth of capital to make better, faster chips? It's because there's this arms race that exists around compute power and chip design, and it's only proliferating, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I mean, my partner and co-founder Mark is, as I mentioned, he is one of these disproportionate minds, right? These highly influential minds that um, he came at the problem differently, which is why we have literally cracked the code on compression. And I can tell you, even some of the biggest companies out there, um, OpenAI, they had a group called Arrakis. You always have to have a crazy name for your teams, right? They
Yeah.
disbanded Arrakis because they couldn't actually crack the code. And so what did you do? You lowered the bar. Instead of saying, actually, we have to come up with the math and we have to come up with the understanding of how to make this compression work, we just said, let's get fancier chips and use more compute power. And
Yep. That's
I look at
always the
this, Vic, and I
case.
say, it's going to be, here's the thing.
Yeah.
Every organization should have some understanding around the level of dependency that you create on things that are not within your control. GPU access, kind of chip design and compute power. Unless you own that cloud, unless you own that information, it's like anything else. A scarcity will occur.
Yep.
Normal economics will always play their role, supply and demand. And all of a sudden, you're going to have really, really, really costly access to compute power and chips. I want to make sure that we're still challenging the best and brightest people on this planet to make sure they're doing what Mark is, which is challenge your team around what can we do where we still get the same business outcome, but we're doing it on much less intense requirements, much less intense compute power, chip design, because that's a frontier. It's a frontier of foreign,
100%.
difficult, very complicated math. But everybody's like, well, we'll just get more money and more access to chips and compute. So to your point, first of all, I took it a little bit different direction than you originally
No, it's
said, but I
perfect.
think this idea of consumption is a really important one for our future, right? Because I didn't expect that I'd get a box every day, Vic. I don't know that the box that I get that has 2 air bubbles that are this big and the dim weight is crazy on it is a good thing for the trees that we're.
Yeah.
But I will say, like, broadly speaking, one of our responsibilities is to hand this thing off to the next generation better than we got it.
Of course.
And here's the thing about that. You and I have had a conversation. I'm not anyone who says slow the innovation train down. I want to challenge people not to take the easiest path just because if it has consequences. And I know now we can see what that's done in other areas, but challenge yourselves around better, harder, more difficult math, more difficult algorithms that do address the core of this, which is how do we get to not having to be every single thing as a major consumption.
Yeah. If I look at my time in technology, and I'm going to riff here for a second, there's been a need. There's been innovation to address it. There's been hyperconsumption. There's been optimization, and then there's a new need, and we keep looping this. And because of the capitalist environment that the universe runs in, it's not just America. I mean, the entire universe is like people want to capitalize on things. So throwing infrastructure at technology, for as long as I've been around, that's what's happened. But for guys like you and Mark and your team, that are not only in it and leveraging, but it's the next piece, right? It's like, how do we optimize? If you're thinking about that, which 99.5% of the companies are not, they'll be around for a lap or two. Or they won't capitalize on the innovation and the things that come around to optimize, only to complete the circle all the way again. Hey, you were going to ask me something. You were going to say, hey, I'm going to ask you something right now. Did I make you forget it, or do you still remember it?
No, I think for me, Vic, it was really around, you've been at the epicenter of a lot of change, right? And it's funny because, to me, interestingly enough, I think people are they're in a wait and see mode. They're observing, right? And I've always felt like the industry requires luminaries, these people that have accumulated a certain amount of experience. They know a lot about the industry that they're a luminary in, but they also have the courage and conviction to have a voice, right? Hey, do this, not that, right?
Yeah.
And I'm curious, we've obviously, I mean, in fairness, we've been moving at breakneck pace, right? So, but when do we start to see the emergence of luminaries, in your estimation, that start to say, hey, listen, we're going to use AI. We're going to have conviction around how we use it in a responsible way. We're going to use it to build more trust. Like, when do we start to see this emergence of the AI leaders into people with the conviction and the courage to do that, in your estimation?
I think it's happening, and I can tell you why. And I think it's happening right now. It's beginning to happen right now. And I'm going to give you a 2016 example of a breakthrough and what it took. And then I'm going to correlate it to the past maybe 30 days.
Yeah.
2016, people were still iffy about cloud computing. 2015, 2016, virtual private cloud, public cloud, like, oh, I'm not going to be, I even watched IBM get in public cloud and then pull back, virtual private cloud, and they dip all around. I open up Google, I see news, and Jamie Dimon comes out, and he's quoted as saying, JP Morgan Chase is moving to public cloud. We we're on the path to fully depreciating a lot of our assets, and we are going to be moving to public cloud, and we're going to be moving workloads there in a methodical way. We've figured out security. We like it. It's leverageable. This is all great, and for all the reasons we can go on a separate podcast about. At that moment in time, the floodgates opened. Literally, it took one article, and I'd be lying to you if I didn't tell you that I leveraged the snot out of that. Nobody wants to be first, and they're looking for that luminary, that visionary. In the last month, there have been 3 things that came out from people who, they have influence. And I'm going to work backwards. Saw a clipping over the weekend. Mark Cuban was on CNBC, and he basically said there are 2 kinds of companies: those who understand, have a plan for AI, and those who don't. And those who don't are going to be gone. It was blunt. And then he went on to talk a little about why and who's responsible for knowing about AI. He said the employees are responsible for knowing about AI, how it's going to help them in their jobs, how to use it, how it's going to make them better. Technology is responsible for knowing about AI, how it's going to fortify the enterprise and do things from security all the way through, operational efficiencies. And he said, and the CEO cannot afford to say, yeah, that's something my tech people are going to go understand. They're going to come back and tell me. If the CEO doesn't know the impact AI he or she will have on their business, they're done. Okay? And I'm going to send you that video after this meeting. And then the middle piece was Mr. Wonderful, Kevin O'Leary, where he talked about the impact of AI, and he made a complete statement, which I did check. And I spoke to a few analysts. He goes, oh, the AI train is on the tracks and it's here. As a matter of fact, if you look at the market is already counting on a 15 to 30% improvement from the benefits of AI. Anybody's even mentioned the initials AI in their Q or in their reporting, that stock price is the reason, they're going up is it's already reflected. And what's going to happen if they don't deliver? So they're going to take a big hit. So it's anticipating the delivery of these efficiencies because they're available and there. I think those three things enough. And listen, there's a McKinsey report on it and a Gartner report on it, and we can go on for days about people who are writing, but these people are of influence. So when you talk about the luminaries, Matt, these are people of influence that come back and they have a voice. And people at a company, a small, maybe a small credit union, and you've got somebody in compliance and legal there, it's very risk averse, and their quote is, I'm a professional worrier. I've heard that a lot, and this is what I do, and I want to make sure the company's tight. When Jamie Dimon, one of the biggest banks in the world, comes out and says, hey, here's an article, 90% of our labor tasks are cut down to like zero in our cash reconciliation process because of AI and the investments we've made. Hey, dude, I mean, there's attention here. So to answer your question succinctly, I think it's begun. I think it's happened. Yeah. The herd is now about to follow.
Well, it's going to be an exciting, like I said, Vic, what greater time to be in the spot that we're at, right? We're not, I would say for all young people getting started in their career, embrace this, right? Immerse yourself in building the resilience around change, being adaptive, wanting to learn the next thing. These are all capabilities that will endure. They will be great over time. For those of us who are a couple chapters ahead, this is our time to really, make sure that we're showing up, because, as with any period where there's lots of disruption, it's going to need some people in the arena, Nick. It's going to need some really great people. And it won't be the critics who count. It'll be those who are in the arena that will matter.
Yeah. What do they say? The marred souls that know not the, I'm paraphrasing, but know not the grit of defeat.
Let us never be with those killed and timid souls that know neither victory nor defeat.
That's right. That neither know victory nor defeat.
Vic, this was as good as being at the bar, which I've been many times with you. So, what a great time.
By the way, I saw Andrew Pryfogle this past week. And, for people on the podcast, Matt and I met, it was maybe a year and a half ago, right? And immediate camaraderie, a lot of, mutual likes and personality. And we hit it off. And there was a dinner later on, and Andrew leaned over between us because we were sort of monopolizing the table and the room and the wine and all that stuff. And he whispered, hey, you two, get a room. It was funny. But he goes, you talked to Coughlin? And I told him that you were going to be on the podcast and that we were going to have a good time talking about stuff. Hey, I think this is a good segue here for a wrap here. First of all, I appreciate you spending time with me tonight. A blast. And I can see many more of these in the future because I'm going to dissect this and we're going to talk topically on some of these things. And maybe we'll even ask Mark to join one of these if we want to really wow the audience.
Oh, I'd love it. Yeah.
But
Mark will bring some absinthe.
All right, that's cool. But aside from embracing the AI and the change, like if you had to go back to your past and bring forward some of the things that would absolutely still apply today for somebody starting out on their path to success, what would you have to say to people who are starting out? Maybe they're starting a business. Maybe they're starting their career in corporate America. Maybe they're in a trade. Whatever they're doing, they're about to embark on their journey. What would you pull from your past and tell them about the road?
Yeah, I mean, Vic, for me, it's a really simple one. I go back to, we started the whole podcast with, what did you learn from your parents? And what were the early days like? And I learned this very early, but everything is a choice, okay? So if you just stop for a minute, it doesn't matter what you've brought to the table up until this point, but it's a decision to like your boss, to get along, to be excited about going in. That's a decision.
Yeah.
But it's also a decision to be receptive to change, not resistant to it. It's a decision to say, I would like to be known as a thought leader relative to this topic. And the reason why I'm saying this is that there's something so empowering about an intentional decision, a very purposeful decision to say, I'm going to want to embrace these things, not resist. They can win me over. Maybe they can. No, listen, it's a decision. I'm going to go give it. And listen, will you have scenarios where you might have to say, either something about that person's behavior tells me I shouldn't be here. 100% that may occur.
Yeah.
But like I said, I believe the vast majority of these interactions are going to be great and positive. So go at them making the decision to engage and embrace in a positive direction. That to me, for the early me, and what's been the most valuable thing that I've learned, make those decisions. Don't let them happen. Make them early on.
I love it. That is a perfect place to wrap. Matt, thank you so much for staying on. I'm gonna click the stop button here. Oh, I'm a little ahead of you here. Are you empty?
I'm empty.
All right. Normally I have the bottle here, but I'm going to do some editing when this is done. So we'll catch up. Hey, thanks again. Have an amazing evening.